At Talus, we know cybersecurity can be tough and you can't protect everything, but with Talus, you can secure what matters most. With Talus industry-leading platforms, you can protect critical applications, data, and identities, anywhere and at scale with the highest ROI. That's why the most trusted brands and largest banks, retailers, and healthcare companies in the world rely on Talus to protect what matters most. Applications, data, and identities. That's Talus, T-H-A-L-E-S. Learn more at talusgroup.com/cyber.
Getting ready to step into your career era? Set yourself apart with Adobe Creative Cloud Pro for students. Hone your skills with apps like Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, and more, powered with the latest in creative AI. Students save over 55% so you can build a portfolio you're proud of. Launch your future with Adobe Creative Cloud Pro for students. Visit adobe.com/students to learn more.
Welcome to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, an arts and culture podcast. I'm Dr. Andrew Rimby, the host and founder. Wherever you are listening, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, please do me a favor, make sure you're following the show and make sure that you rate and review us. It really means a lot, and it continues to allow me to get really exciting guests for the podcast and to continue delivering the podcast for free. Remember, though, we do have a Patreon, so if you don't want to listen to ads and you want to watch the video episodes of the podcast, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Do you know that there is a book club? It's free and virtual. So easy to just join the book club in your pajamas on a Sunday afternoon. Our next book club is June 22nd at 5 p.m. We are reading Sophie Gilbert's Girl on Girl, How Pop Culture Turned a Generation of Women Against Themselves. She writes for The Atlantic. She is such an amazing pop culture expert. So if you've always wondered, wait, why did the paparazzi harass Britney Spears like that? Or did the Spice Girls really have a love-hate relationship with each other? You're going to want to read this book. So to join the book club, email ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com and I will give you the Zoom link, June 22nd, 5 p.m. Without further ado, and a brief message of thanks. Thank you to Mary DePippi, the chief contributor, and Christian Garcia, who edits this podcast, and my fiance and parents, who continue delivering really creative ideas my way. And without further ado, here's today's episode.
Hey, true crime friends. Welcome back to True Crime in Academia. As always, I am your host, Mary DePippi. Happy October, everyone. It is officially Halloween month, which means all things spooky and horror and just fabulousness is going on right now. I obviously am so excited. This is my favorite time of year. Even before we got to this month, I had started consuming, which I think I mentioned on the last episode, just a lot of Halloween shows, movies, content. Recently, I actually did my first spooky outing, like activity type of thing. I went with the Ivory Tower's own Andrew Rimby and his fiance. We went to Night of Terror at Creamy Acre Farms. That is like a horror attraction, haunted hayride. I think they also have zombie paintball, as well as other haunted attractions. And I have not gone there since I was in high school. So, this place has been open for a very long time. And having gone back after so long, it was so cool to see just all of the attention to detail and, the amount of effort that is put in, not just by the actors and the people that try to scare you and all that stuff, but also in the props and sets and animatronics and everything themselves. Everything was just so top notch. We had such a great time. Also, shout out to Andrew Rimby, our creative commander in chief over here at the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. It was his birthday, which is why we were going. So shout out to him. Happy birthday, Andrew. I love you, and to many more years of celebrating your birthday together. So for October, I was going to do a 2-part series, and we're still going to do that. However, my initial thoughts were to do Ted Bundy. And here's why I switched. Because the day that I'm recording this, October 3rd, Mean Girls Day, it also is the day of Monster, the story of Ed Gein, dropping on Netflix. So I've decided to switch gears and do a 2-part series on Ed Gein, the inspiration for the movie Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock. You know, the iconic one, the shower scene with the huge knife and Jamie Lee Curtis's mom being stabbed to death in the shower. I mean, you know, what could be more perfect for spooky season? So thoughts right now, because of course I have started Monster, the story of Ed Gein on Netflix. I have to say, Charlie Hunnam, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. I have always been wildly attracted to him. He is just a very attractive man. I saw him in Sons of Anarchy and, you know, just fell in love with him from there. But seeing him in this role as Ed Gein gives me a whole new level of respect for him as an actor. The way that he has just completely embodied this person down to his mannerisms and the way that he speaks is just so incredible. So I highly am recommending this right now. As we go through this series, I'll talk a little bit more about what I think of him and things like that. But so far, everyone is so well casted aside from Charlie. My only issue so far, though, and it's a very slight issue, it's just that Charlie is still wildly attractive, even as Ed Gein. So that part has been a little rough for me to try and not find this man so attractive. I keep having to reference actual pictures of Ed Gein just so that way I can not only just differentiate, but also make myself like remember like, oh no, you're not actually attracted to Ed Gein. It's just Charlie who's doing an excellent job playing him. So with that, let's take a quick commercial break, and when we get back, we will get into part 1 of Ed Gein.
I was recently watching Return to Oz and Nosferatu with my fiance, and I thought, wait, I just had on Broadview Press authors who wrote a vampire literature anthology and the iconic edition of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. So I said to my fiance, you know what? I need to tell everyone who's listening to ITBR that BroadviewPress.com has everything from classic novels to discussions about vampire literature, vampires in film and TV, the philosophy of sports, Native American culture, horror. There is so much on Broadview Press's website. I urge you all right now, search broadviewpress.com. You will see that not only do they have books for college instructors, which if you do teach college, you better add them to your list because it's amazing, all the resources they have. But if you have just wandered around a bookstore or a library and thought, you know, everyone always told me to read Moby Dick, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to fully understand it. BroadviewPress.com has you covered because they have amazing notes and sources to help you dissect that huge whale of a tale. See what I did there? I was just watching the Page Master, so there's a little Moby Dick reference. Head to BroadviewPress.com, use the exclusive code they gave us, Ivory Tower, 20% off your entire order. Yes, your entire order. Enjoy your reading, and please reach out to me and let me know what you're reading from Broadview Press. I would love to share it on social media.
So real quick before we get into the episode, because I recorded the intro for this on Friday before I heard this news, but I just wanted to touch on the fact and acknowledge that P. Diddy, Sean Combs, was sentenced to 4 years in prison for, I'm not even sure exactly what charges they were able to get to stick. But I mean, it's just, I feel so terrible for the victims because that is not justice. And I think overall, as a society, collectively, we need to do more for victims, like, believe them. Anyway, so like I said, just didn't want to get started with the whole episode without acknowledging that. But anyway, let's get into it. So Edward Gein was born on August 27th, 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin, to parents Augusta and George Gein. Now, George did a couple of different things to provide for his family. At a time, he worked as a carpenter, then he was a tanner and a firefighter, and at one point he was even a store owner. But this was before he and Augusta bought a farm in Plainfield and decided to pursue a life as a farmer. Ed and his older brother Henry had a pretty tumultuous upbringing. Their father was an alcoholic, and their mother was a very domineering and verbally abusive religious person. So, she would specifically use her religion and her religious views and wield them against her children to manipulate and try and control them. She would often tell them that women are evil and harlots and really discourage them from having any other friendships outside of the family, which, living on this huge farm in a very isolated area, was kind of easy to do. Now, I personally am very curious about her upbringing because, yes, while she is this very religious person, she's also taking herself out of it, I think, from this view of women, basically that every other woman is a problem except for me. And again, obviously her religion probably has something to do with these views, but also, like I said, I'm very curious as to what happened in her life and in her childhood that made her be this way. Basically, what trauma shaped her into this woman who teaches her sons to hate other women and to not have relationships with them and, to just not also have friendships with anyone. Now, because of this, Edward was not very socially well-rounded and quite socially inept. And overall, this made him just very shy. And one of the things that his classmates and teachers kind of thought that he just had strange mannerisms. And one of the things that they pointed out was that he would just kind of laugh abruptly. So there's potential, mental illness involved here, which we'll get into in part 2. But despite his social failings, he actually was a really good reader. Now, of course, given his mother's love of religion, I'm sure the only thing he really read was the Bible or anything she approved. But now, while Ed idolized his mother, his older brother Henry did not. And in fact, he did not agree with a lot of the things that, their mother was saying and how they were being brought up. And he was quite vocal against her. He was also very concerned with the way that Ed idolized her, because it kind of borderlined on obsession. And he knew it was not good for him. But of course, when you're still living under the same house, you kind of have to, play along and follow the rules, I guess. But at least he was able to verbally confront his mother in some respect. Whereas Edward, like I said, he pretty much just idolized her and did anything she wanted, really. In 1940, George dies of heart failure, and most likely because that's due to his alcoholism. But because of this, Henry and Ed were taking on all of these odd jobs to try and make money and help support the farm. This goes on for about 4 years. Now, according to the reports, one day while they were attempting to have a controlled burning brush, I've actually seen this on the McBees, where basically it's just like a controlled fire. You want to light up the tall grass and, all of the shrubbery and plants and whatnot to clear the ground so you can plant or, use it for whatever you need to. Unfortunately, though, this gets out of hand and the fire department is called in and Henry winds up going missing. And Ed actually is the one who reports him missing. A search team is called in, and sadly, his body is found amongst like the burned brush that they were doing, and he was completely face down. And it seemed like he had been dead for some time. However, though, ultimately, Henry's death was ruled an accident due to the fire. And I think the coroner wrote that his cause of death was asphyxiation. However, though, some sources say that there was potential bruising on Henry's head. It didn't say the front or the back, but just that there was bruising. Now, the series does touch on this, and they depict it as obviously being Edward's fault. And, once we get into everything in part 2, authorities do start to believe this theory as well. Basically, they believe, or that what was believed later was that he hit his brother on the head or beat him or something and then put his body in the, uncontrolled brush that they were burning and to try and cover it up, basically. And, it does make sense. Also, Edward was extremely, attached to the mother. Henry was not okay with it. He had concerns about Edward's idolization of her. And also it seemed that, and according to one or two sources, and I think the series says this as well, Henry is actually going against his mother hardcore by dating a woman who is a divorced mother of 2. So those are some potential areas of conflict for them. Other theories that I just entertained for myself was that potentially the mother did it as an accident and had Edward cover it up. She would also have to be prone to physical violence, which she really hasn't been. But again, it's still a theory. And then another one that is just also that maybe it could have been the fire. Maybe a heavy tree branch fell on him and that's what could have happened. Again, I just wanted to play, not necessarily devil's advocate, but look at all of the different sides of this and what potentially could have happened. However, though, it does seem most likely that Edward is responsible.
Summer's almost here, and as a lover of literature, bookstores, libraries, the constant question I get is, Andrew, what book should I add to my summer reading list and read at the beach this summer? And I just always had a problem trying to tell people what to read, but guess what? No more. I have a magazine that has become my best friend. It is the G&LR, the Gay and Lesbian Review, a bi-monthly magazine of all things LGBTQ arts and culture. Their current issue is called The First Homosexuals, and it is guest edited by Dr. Jonathan D. Katz, who is a professor at the University of Penn. He was the founding president of New York's Leslie Lohman Museum of Gay and Lesbian Art, which, if you've never been there, is a free museum. So definitely go there. It's in Soho and it's amazing. Back to the GNLR. This new edition is so exciting to read. It looks at how the term homosexuality is an invented term. It was invented by medical scientists in the late Victorian period. So I can't wait to read all of these articles, but there's articles talking about homosexuality in Japan, Russia, Canada, Paris, India, Argentina. And Jonathan D. Katz talks about his exhibition called The First Homosexuals, now on display in Chicago's Wrightwood Museum from May 2nd to July 26th. But I can't get to Chicago this summer, so I'm so happy that I get to look through the magazine and see all of the articles that Jonathan has put together with contributing writers. I'm interviewing Jonathan soon, so look out for that episode, everyone. The GNLR has given me an exclusive promo code. Write it down, everyone. It's ITBR Choice, and you get a free issue with your subscription. So, glreview.org, go to the subscribe section, ITBR Choice, you get a free issue, and I can't wait for you all to enjoy the GNLR as much as I do. Please let me know if you're reading the GNLR, and until next time when I have Jonathan D. Katz on.
A year later, in 1945, Edward's mother, Augusta, dies after suffering 2 strokes. Now, the first one, it was said that she took after she found out that Henry was dead. This, again, is depicted in the series. However, I couldn't find many sources that supported that. It kind of was just more black and white, just saying that she had these 2 strokes. And then once she suffered the second one, that ultimately killed her. Now, the series, again, does depict this. She basically brings Edward with her to go to a straw farmer. And the sources that I all saw said that she was actually going to buy straw. In the series, it says she's going to collect the $10 in rent that this man owes her because he's farming on her land. But like I said, that seemed to be only in the series and not necessarily something that I could verify with other sources. But anyway, when she goes there, she's going to get the straw, and when she gets there, she sees this farmer actively killing a dog. And a woman runs out of the house, a woman that she knows is not this man's wife, and I think she might even be married to someone else. That was kind of the impression you got. But the second she sees her, she's not at all fazed by the animal abuse that is occurring. Even though for me, like, I'm not going to get into it. They do it a completely different way than what the sources I found versus the series. But I'm not trying to see red. So we're just going to skip that. So anyway, she's not fazed by that. This bitch of a woman. Not surprising. But she's upset more so about the woman who came out, and she starts screaming at the farmer, saying that, you know, she's not your wife, she's a harlot, she's this, she's that, you're going to hell. All of that. And that is what sends her into her second stroke and then kills her. Now, being totally alone and the only one responsible for this farm, Ed took on odd jobs, you know, in town, such as being a handyman, and he even was a babysitter. Yes, there were people out there who trusted this man with their child. And honestly, at this point, you know, he had really done nothing. And the perception of him really in town was that he seemed to be like a guy who really loved his mom and, you know, had just gone through all of this tragedy. And again, I think because he was super shy and, like I said, potentially have some sort of mental illness, I think he just seemed a lot gentler to a lot of people. Now, Augusta's death specifically hit Ed the hardest out of all of his losses. And a lot of people had said, who knew at least of them and knew of their relationship, that, you know, she was his best friend. And even a little gross, some people were like, oh, she was his true love, which we're getting into some Oedipus and Jocasta complexes with that. But regardless, it was easy to see that this man was very close to his mother and wanted, you know, her approval and all of that. So obviously her death hit him the hardest. Then on, he kind of declined. He boarded up rooms in the house that his mother frequented. So her bedroom, the living room, and I think even the parlor, they remained like the most pristine areas of the house. Mainly probably because they were boarded up and untouched, but I think he also tried to keep them clean. Like these spaces were almost like shrines for his mother. Meanwhile, the rest of the house that he's living in is pretty much like in squalor. Like, he's not really throwing out his trash. He's not cleaning up after himself. In some of the images of when police look through his house, which I will put in the social media images next week when we do part 2, but you kind of see or get the feel that like he's borderline on hoarder a little bit. But yeah, not exactly normal behavior. I mean, yes, we all grieve differently, but one could argue this is pretty severe in that, you know, I mean, what he does later is obviously also very severe. But at this point, at this stage in his life and what is happening, it is a lot. And his reaction to the way that he's dealing with his grief is not exactly the most healthy. Now, again, during this time, there were not nearly as many resources as we have today. But like, if you knew someone who had recently lost their parent and was doing this, you would advise that they seek help immediately. But again, those resources weren't necessarily available, and living on a farm with a ton of land and you're kind of secluded up there all by yourself, you can see kind of how his mental state just completely starts to deteriorate. During this time, Ed also started becoming interested in anatomy and also these pulp magazines that featured cannibalism and some of like literally the worst possible crimes against humanity that the Nazis committed. Especially ones committed by one particular woman, Ilse Coach. I'm not exactly sure if that's how you pronounce her name. I honestly really don't give a shit because she's a Nazi and fuck Nazis. So, but anyway, she was basically like, before we realized that like Buffalo Bill, Ed Gein, because that's another character that he inspired, existed, she was like the original. So she was kind of like Buffalo Betty. She would make furniture pieces out of enslaved and encamped Jewish people. So in one respect, I'm like fine with us ignoring her, but at this, like, because she doesn't deserve that credit, like, it's just a weird thing, right? Because again, we have this true thing that happened, and we see it, like I said, in Silence of the Lambs. He inspired the Buffalo Bill character. You know, and then also, like I mentioned at the top in the intro, the inspiration for Psycho. And the way that Hollywood has glamorized him and his crimes, I mean, I'm not going to beat around the bush. They have. I mean, in trying to exploit and tell people about this, they're also glamorizing it and not necessarily putting it in the true light that, you know, other docu-series and things would do. So while that I'm glad that Ilsa Coach, or whatever the hell her name is, isn't glamorized the way he is. I mean, I'm sure that's for the fact because she's a fucking Nazi. But, you know, like, I'm glad that she doesn't have that glamorization. But at the same time, like, it seems that some of his things that we know him for, the atrocities that we know him for, were actually, could be pinpointed to be inspired by this other horrific human being who I hope spends the rest of their days rotting in hell. Also, segue just into the fact that when you're watching this series, there are a lot of cuts to Alfred Hitchcock and putting Psycho together as a film, which is interesting, I guess, and helps fill the time in some ways. Because as we'll see, like, Ed Gein commits a lot of atrocities, but he only ever murders 2 people. I mean, obviously that is 2 people too many for any one person, But I also think a lot of people assume when you hear his name and that he's such a huge killer, and I even myself forget sometimes, that in the end, compared to other major killers, well-known serial killers like Ted Bundy, he has a significantly less victim count. But either way, it is a very interesting feature to add to this series. I don't know if any of the claims that they're making about Anthony Perkins or Alfred Hitchcock are exactly true. I mean, I've heard some of the things that they speculate, trying not to spoil anything for anyone. But yeah, I'm not sure if they're necessarily added to sensationalize or just make the series more interesting, or if they're actually true. So anything that's not Ed Gein specifically, I do not have the exact facts. But again, just another interesting part of the series. Now, a couple other things that I saw of ways that Edward was able to make money. It seemed like he got a government subsidy in 1951, and then there's also speculation in the early 50s that he potentially sold 80 acres of land that his brother Henry owned. So even if he wasn't working necessarily actively as a handyman or babysitter, it does seem like he was able to somewhat support himself financially, if not just barely, with some of these things, like I said, the subsidy and the selling of his brother's land. Around 1947, Edward began grave robbing for the purposes of body parts, to create, furniture, face masks, kitchen items. It was said that he took a skull and made a bowl out of it, but also for purposes of necrophilia. I saw, and I'll touch a little bit more on it next week when I do the part 2 of this case, but it seemed like he went grave robbing at least 40 times within the span of maybe 5 years or something like that. And some of those times he literally just froze and didn't do anything. But that still doesn't excuse all of the other times that he dismembered and defiled dead people's bodies. But that is where we are going to leave off this week. And next week, we will get into more of the crimes, specifically the murders of Ed Gein and the fallout. So until then, don't forget to follow True Crime in Academia on social media at True Crime in Academia on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. Also, if you would like to listen to this episode and other True Crime in Academia episodes ad-free, go to patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room and become a subscriber today. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week. And until next time, I will see you all later.
What does Sunset Boulevard, The Sound of Music, Vertigo, Snow White, The Wizard of Oz, and even Rebecca have in common? They've been covered on my friend Christian Garcia's podcast called That Old Gay Classic Cinema. Every time he is researching and deep diving a film with his guests, he asks the question, what's so queer about this film? You're going to love his podcast. You can listen to it on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and follow him on Instagram and TikTok at That Old Gay Classic Cinema. I hope you all enjoy it as much as I do.